Well, good afternoon everyone, this is Alex with LBLN Helicopters, and we're live now with Long Beach Local News. We've got Ryan in the back and Danny in the co-seat here, who's one of the new guys working for us. So we've got a combination of stuff that we're doing today. We're going to actually be doing some YouTube work as well as doing some news reporting at the same time. So as well as testing all the equipment that we've got on board. Ryan's been kitting it out for the last 2 hours, so we'll see if it all works properly. So any questions you have or any feedback, please let us know. Again, this is Alex with LBLN Helicopters, and welcome to another YouTube video that we're doing. Today is actually going to be an interesting video because we're going to combine some of news reporting with it. So in terms of piloting, I'm going to talk about how we actually do piloting for the news, for the local news here in Long Beach, some of the techniques we do, as well as if I have to actually report as well. See, already we've got some interesting things we haven't got to fiddle with here, where Danny's got to fiddle with the mount, because obviously helicopters vibrate a bit. And the mount wants to move around, so, you know, there's always technical, interesting things with what we're doing. But looking at the 405, as we can imagine, the 405 and the 710 intersection is pretty horrendous right now. It's pretty bad on the on-ramp coming onto the 405. That's the 405 southbound from the 710 northbound. But it's a clear day. We were going to do this flight 2 days ago, and when it was just about to have that horrendous little rainstorm come in, and thank goodness we didn't, because it was grey and nasty and crappy, and today is absolutely clear blue 22, and it's a perfect day for flying up here. I can see as far as the horizon will take us right now, so I can see Catalina pretty clearly. I'm actually going to spend a bit of time today over by all these ships out here. One of the main focus of today's flight is actually going to be what's going on at the port. I'm sure everyone in Long Beach has noticed how there is actually a plethora of ships. It's like someone sneezed ships outside the breakwater right now.
What's your frequency change group?
I think there was 48 at one time, so hold on 1 second, I'm just going to go on the tower.
Hey Danny, can you just straighten that up just a little? Yeah. Am I tightening it with the main bolt, or?
Long Beach Tower, 71910 single, holding for 26 left, ready for left plate traffic.
Alright, this is your 982, number 0, Kilo Tango, Long Beach Tower, Summit.
Because the red knob's not wanting to tighten anymore. Yeah, it's the one behind that. The one behind it? That's going.
Long Beach Tower, Hotel Sierra is clear to the south for frequency change.
Approved.
Alright, so Danny's still fiddling with his mounts here in the front, and we're just about to pass over the new Gerald Desmond Bridge, just swinging by the World Trade Center right now, and the Queen Mary, and
You have the multi-tool?
all the cruise ships. So, bear with us a little bit here, we're just going to have a little bit of a play with things at the moment. So, I'll start talking about the port. I mean, obviously, the Port of LA and the Port of Long Beach combined together are pretty much one of the biggest, if not the biggest, combined port in the world right now. Billions of dollars worth of goods in here at any one time, and it usually go through here. However, COVID has impacted here in so many different ways, and some of them are just being seen right now. 2019 was, at that time, was a record year for the port, and then beginning of 2020, obviously, it was everything ground to a halt. As soon as China stopped exporting, there was, you know, everything around here turned down. I think it was 17% in the first quarter of 2020, which for the port is a huge amount. And then during the rest of 2020, some kind of interesting stuff happened, really. Hold on 1 second, make Harbour traffic, helicopter 744 Hotel Sierra, Gerald Desmond Bridge, southbound, 900 Harbour. At the beginning of 2020, the focus of people's consumer habits when they were stuck at home changed. And rather than going out and spending money on movie tickets and going out, people were actually just ordering things. And you know, Amazon obviously became one of the valuable companies for a while, and Jeff Bezos is now the richest guy in the world. And that was mainly due to the pandemic. So obviously the demand for goods went through the roof during the pandemic, and that put enormous strain on the port with all of the goods starting to get imported. As you can see right now, we've got probably 30 ships out here. So on average before, ships used to come pretty much straight to their berth to offload all their cargo, and it was a maximum of like maybe 2 days if it was really, really busy for the ships to get on berth. During the height of the pandemic, it was over a week ships were sitting out here on average on anchor right now because there's simply no room in both ports to actually offload the cargo. That was made doubly worse by the fact that a lot of the ship workers got coronavirus at the same time. What's going on down there? Oh, no, I thought there was people down there on that ship, but it's actually not. So, there's 15,000 workers in the port, between both ports, and I think at any one time about 800 of them were out for having coronavirus symptoms. So that's a pretty sizable amount of people that suddenly are not unloading containers. Coupled with, massive demand at the same time. Hold on 1 second. Alright, the 4 hotels here. We're just crossing the breakwater just to the east of Angels Gate. We've got your visual on you. We're down at 800.
We got you, sir.
Just looking at that aeroplane up there. We're just talking to an aeroplane right now. So anyway, combined with enormous amounts of demand because of the pandemic with less dock workers, it just meant that A ships were sitting out here for over 7 days before they could even get to berth. And then when they were here, it took them longer to unload, and then the goods sat on the harbour for an average of another 7 days as well, when it was normally about 2 to 3 days again. So on average, stuff was taking an extra 2 weeks to even get onto ships and out anywhere. That pretty much wasn't a warehouse within 60 miles that wasn't full. So essentially just massive bottlenecks in the supply chain around here. And even now you can see that there's, 20 ships, 30 ships just sitting out here doing nothing. They're just waiting and waiting and waiting to be offloaded. Obviously, in some ways, this is a good problem for the port because it'll have record numbers going into the end of the year. And in other ways, obviously, not such a good way when you've got so many of the staff out. And I know that the port was one of the first to really push for its staff to get inoculated, just because it needed to have them back on there. And really, there's just a shortage of skilled labour. So, if you're worrying about why your Amazon package is taking just a little bit longer than normal, all you got to do is look down here and see this multitude of millions of containers sitting out here to know what the problem is. Anyway, so when we're flying this stuff for the news, a lot of what I do as a pilot is really, it's not about thinking where the camera angles are going right now. Yes, we've got GoPros mounted, which helps, but a lot of it when you're flying for photographers and videographers, you've got to fly the camera. So for example, right now, we're going to just do an orbit right here of this Evergreen ship right now. Usually what I'll do, I'll bring it down to about 60 knots, something around about there, and I've got to put it in an orbit. When I say an orbit, I want to maintain the same altitude and be the same distance away from the ship as well, just so it's equidistant the whole time and gives the guy with the camera an easier time of getting a good shot. So we're maintaining about 700 feet at the moment around this guy and about a quarter of a mile away from it. You don't want to fly too close because A, it's annoying, and B, it's a safety issue, right? So we don't need to. You've got good booms on the lenses. So we're going to come around the stern of the vessel right now, around the back, and we're still maintaining 800 feet, doing about 70 knots right now. Just keeping an equidistant orbit. This is one of the things we teach our students to do when they're getting their basic licenses. That sunset, that sun coming down is actually pretty pretty on the top of it. It's a big square blob in the middle of the ocean. And we just continue this round, and depending on what type of target you're doing and how quickly you want to go onto it, which we'll demonstrate in a second, then we can be more abrupt with our movements. But for this kind of shot when we're just looking at a ship itself, then we can be pretty chilled about it when we're going around. And we're just trying to get a nice panoramic shot. So we'll go over right now. I can see behind us, which I'll bring it around to now, we got a ship. It looks like an auto carrier coming out here, but it's moving. So we'll actually go onto that target and have a look at that ship as well before we start heading back inland. But yeah, that's the skinny on the port, really. Obviously, record years in 2020. Probably we'll still see a big backlog until 2021 where they try and catch up with everything. Obviously, once the vaccine keeps rolling out, they'll get more workers back and be more effective again, and hopefully they'll be able to get things off the docks. But I think for the foreseeable future, we're going to see a lot of ships off the coastline here, and this is not just in Long Beach and LA. Obviously it's exacerbated here because it's such a big port, but it's all across the world and all across the US. We're such a big net importer of goods from abroad. This is what happens. So here we are, we're going to come into another ship here, and I'm going to do a little bit of a tighter orbit around this guy just so that we can get a better, closer glimpse of it. really ungainly ship, this thing. It just looks like a grey box, but it's a car carrier. And so what I had to do is actually fly with a tail rotor a lot. I'm not just using the cyclic in my right hand to turn, I'm using the tail rotor to pull the back end round to keep the camera on target the whole time round here. You get a little bit more aggressive with the controls. Again, the main aim is to always keep the target on what you're doing. Oregon Highway in Panama. I guess most stuff is registered to Panama around here for various regulatory reasons. But that is really a horrible looking sitting out there, but hey, if you get your Honda Civic, it probably just dropped your Honda Civic off for you out here. So we're currently around about, I would say about a mile just to the south of the breakwater right now, probably south of Queensgate at the moment. Now we're just going to go and head back into Long Beach in a bit and just chat a bit more about Long Beach and recap on whatever else is going on. How are we doing on our signal, Ryan? Is it all over the place?
It's not bad. Just out here a little bit.
Okay, so you think it'll get better as we go back in? Did we lose the signal, or we?
No, it's up. It's just cutting in and out.
Okay, all right. Well, hopefully it gets a bit better once we go inland here.
An interesting part of all these ships sitting out here right now is the environmental impact. Considering how Long Beach is one of the greenest ports in the world and world-renowned for it, a big part of that attaining of a goal happened because we installed offshore power.
Yeah.
So ships won't have to run their engines to be able to the electronics going.
That's a good point, right? Because they are still having to maintain themselves sitting out here. The crews are still out here. They're still having to maintain basic functions on the ship, even though it's not going anywhere. And that still all chews power up and burns fossil fuels, and they're sitting out here. So, yeah, that's a good point. Always a very interesting thing. You can always tell which direction the wind's coming from, right? They're all like giant windsocks, these ships. Harbour traffic helicopter 741 Hotel Sierra is just coming up on Queensgate for downtown Long Beach. Northwest bound, 800 Harbour. Alright, so we'll talk a little bit more about the harbour here. So I don't think anyone knows here the history of the breakwater here. The breakwater is, last time I checked, the longest breakwater in the world, and it was created just after Pearl Harbor. After Pearl Harbor, the US was absolutely terrified. It moved in, obviously, of another invasion on its fleet. The fleet was moved here, over there, on Navy Way, actually. Between the two ports, and back then the submarine was a new invention, and the US Navy was very, very worried about potentially the Japanese coming and torpedoing what was left of the fleet, so they created the breakwater as a barrier, so that they created two effective choke points to make it really hard for the Japanese to sneak in here and torpedo the rest of the ships. But you know, obviously an attack never came, as we well know, right? The Japanese surrendered at the Battle of Midway on the sister ship to the Iowa over there in San Pedro. But then after that, it went into a container port. This was all reclaimed land, it was all marshland, and then the fleet moved back down to Coronado in San Diego back in the 1980s. So now it's obviously a big container port. That's Pier 400 over there, which is called Pier 400 because it's 400 acres. Pier 300 is called Pier 300 because it's 300 acres. And here we are, just right over the top, in between the two, very close to what used to be called Sea Launch. And right now we're just going to go and cruise into downtown. We'll do a couple of orbits of downtown and talk a bit about that before going in. I'm just going to make a quick call to the tower and get us clearance to go in, so bear with me for a second. Long Beach Tower, helicopter 744 Hotel. Long Beach Tower, helicopter 744 Hotel Sierra is coming up on the Queen Mary, requesting to do a bit of work downtown for about 5 to 10 minutes before the South Rondo arrival, landing Rosswood Lima.
Number 744 Hotel Sierra, Long Beach Tower, report in down Redondo, approved, landing at Ross, will be at run risk.
Roger, reporting down on Redondo, landing at risk for Hotel Sierra, thanks. Alright, so my quick call to Long Beach Tower. We're just coming up here around about the Queen Mary, which obviously has been closed for a long time, still holds the record for the most number of people ever carried on a ship, just over, coming up to 17,000. It was used as a troop transport in the Second World War, also as a mobile command platform for Winston Churchill and everyone else when they were fighting. And yeah, it was called the painted battleship Grey and called the Grey Lady back then. Got a reputation as a ghost ship mainly because it was too fast and it outran all of its escorts and then run some of them over as well. So unfortunately, back then, radar wasn't too hot, and they couldn't really detect each other, and yeah, it was actually too fast. It outrun all the U-boats and the submarine, the German submarines, so they could never get it as much as they wanted to. I'm just avoiding all the seagulls right here. And then it came here in the 1960s, and has been here ever since.
Roger, November 6, November Golf.
Right next to it, we've got the old Spruce Goose hangar there, which, you know, Howard Hughes built the Spruce Goose, which is still the biggest aircraft ever built, with a 300-foot odd wingspan. But back in the 90s, it was used as a movie studio as well.
47 seconds here, like 30, clear to land.
The original Batman movies, I believe, got filmed there. The ones with Jack Nicholson and Michael Keaton, Michelle Pfeiffer and Danny DeVito. Gotham City was inside there as a movie set, so yeah, it was a pretty cool fact here. Here we are over downtown Long Beach, and just cruising over Shoreline Village, we're over in the Pacific and everything else. Hopefully all this stuff will be starting to open up right now that we come back into the red tier now in Long Beach. We come off that purple restrictive tier and things are starting to open up, which means I can get my ass down the gym again, which has been too long. Probably lift about half as much as I could probably previously lift, but it'll still be more than Ryan in the back, you know, which is always good, because he can't lift that.
Is here for traffic, start your right turn for left base for like 2
Just coming over the lighthouse at Shoreline.
Right now for left base 2 o'clock.
The lighthouse is a good one to demonstrate a different type of orbit, right? So with this one we're going to actually slow down a lot. We're at 700 feet right now. Our previous orbit was, you know, like about 70 knots. We're going to slow down super slow on this one.
13 Lima,
Get much more of it close in, slower orbit. But with this one you're a pilot, you've got to really understand your wind direction. You don't want to get into settling with power. But you also got to understand what the wind will do to you, because it will push you and make you drift. So you have to sort of elongate out different sides of your orbit here, otherwise, before you know it, you're either drifting away from your target or you've drifted over the top of it. Either way, you miss your target, which is absolutely no good for if you're shooting on it. Here we are, right over Shoreline Village up here, so if anyone's out there, which absolutely no one is, it's as quiet as a mouse down there. We just wave it out. And then we can also, if I know the wind direction, we'll do what we could now, we'll bring it into what's called an outer ground effect hover. If we got enough, we know the wind direction now, we got enough power on the day, and say Ryan wants to get a static shot or something, then I'm actually going to bring it up into a complete outer ground effect hover right now. Looking more out the side, checking the power, checking the wind, blowing ourselves up. Here we are, we're not actually really moving at all right now. But this is actually much harder to do. You've got to really understand your wind direction, different type of flying, but if you're really trying to get a static shot of something, this is the only way to do it. So right now, what I don't want to do is descend, because I was descending to my own downwash, which is really not any good. What I'm just really trying to do is stay over the same spot. Obviously the wind's going to push us around a little bit, but we're not doing too bad right now. We can sit here, well, until we run out of gas pretty much, or the wind changes direction. But it gives us the ability, this is what you see the news helicopters doing when they're trying to stay over the same bit right now. And here we go. Pretty cool, right? Now you just annoy everyone on the ground because we're all noisy, just literally sitting here in a hover. Alright. And off we go. We got 1, 2, 3 cruise ships to send out here, right? One at the terminal, then 2 more out there. 2 Carnival and that other one. I think it's Norwegian or something, that other one out there. Alright, so we're just going to cruise back along and let's all hope that we get the... I don't know if we'll have the Long Beach Grand Prix this year, I hope we do. Really good to get the Long Beach Grand Prix, I missed it last year. I think everyone missed it last year at Long Beach.
Yeah.
Alright. So we're just going back to 700 feet again, we will just cruise back along. So, if you guys have found that a little bit more insightful into what we do with the news when we're flying, from a pilot point of view, you know, like I said, a lot of it is your ability to keep the camera on target with either prevailing wind conditions as a factor, other aircraft as a factor. You always got to fly with safety inside in consideration. If it's a live scene and you've got the police helicopters on scene as well, you've got to go much higher to stay out of their way. You never want to get in the police helicopters' way when they're actually trying to actively control the scene. So we're up to 2,000 feet then, you've got to make sure you've got big cameras for that point.
26 left, 431.
And especially if it's bad weather, all the winds, kind of funky there, it makes it a little bit more challenging. But always, you're flying from the perspective of the guy who's doing the camera work. You're not flying from a pilot's perspective. Make a quick call to the tower. Tower, Eagle 4 Hotel Sierra is inbound on South Redondo.
Number 4 Hotel Sierra, roger.
Alright, that was me just telling the tower, we're inbound. We're coming over Redondo Avenue right now.
26 right, click the option.
Option 26 right, power to Nara Golf.
We do our best here to be as noise friendly as well. We try and fly directly over
2007.
the roads as much as possible. We try and always be at 700 feet and as high as we can be. We can't really go above 700 because then we get into conflict potentially with a fixed wing aircraft around here. But we can do our best to be as neighbourly as possible because we understand helicopters are noisy and we know you're all trying to just enjoy your afternoon beer in your garden and don't want us clattering overhead, so we do what we can for you. Just coming past Signal Hill, which I'm sure everyone knows the history of Signal Hill. Back in the day it used to be called Porcupine Hill if I remember correctly, because it had so many oil derricks over it, it looked like a porcupine. And then it got renamed Signal Hill as I understand it, as sort of a homage to the Native Americans who used to use it for smoke signals because it was the highest area around here. Of course all of LA used to be underwater. We're talking millions of years ago. The only reason all of this land is here is because over millions of years all the silt coming down from the LA River from the mountains gradually built up and created this and poked its head above sea level. Palos Verdes actually used to be an island. Why the ground here is so bad to build on because it's just all sandy, and that's because it used to be underwater, right? Or it used to be silt and sand.
Over to ground, 9100 Tango.
Alright, just apologies for the noise in the radios now, just because I'm coming back into the airport environment and I need to be able to listen to what's going on. We're just coming over the 405 and guess what? 405 southbound looks absolutely terrible. That's why we use helicopters, right? Who wants to see all that traffic down there? So left and right, it's pretty crappy all the way past the airport. So if you can avoid the 405, do, because it's crap. Hotel Sierra, just crossing the town now, we'll cross 26 left, 500.
Hotel Sierra, head to be clear land.
Clear to land for Hotel Sierra, thank you.
Landing rocks will be gunners.
Hotel Sierra. Alright, just bringing us into land right now. We've got to cross all active runways here at Long Beach at 500 feet, which is a little bit challenging. Just because then we come into an extremely steep approach, as you can now see, coming across. 26 left here, got 30 ahead of us. And so essentially I'm slowing down to like 30 knots, maybe less right now, and bringing us into a very tight left-hand turn, so we're pretty much stopped right now, and we're just starting to descend. Big trick of helicopter pilots when not getting into something which we call settling with power, which is a massive danger to helicopters if you don't not aware of your wind direction actually and what it is. And essentially this is what it says, you're settling into your own downwash when you've got power applied, which means that when you've got disturbed air that you're ingesting, you're not creating as much lift and eventually you'll create no lift, in which case not good for us. So one of the most fundamental things that we train and we teach as a helicopter pilot with all our students is to recognize the symptoms of it and not get it in the first place. But you're always having to manage it depending on what type of flying that you're doing. And actually right then you can feel that vibration. That's actually us starting to adjust our own downwash as we get close to the ground. It creates this vibration. So that's one of the big indicators for us that we're getting close to that settling with power. So that's when we don't want to descend anymore. And it's those sort of things that give us cues as pilots with what we're doing to not get into a situation that we don't want to get into. Well, thanks everyone for tuning in, and I hope the live video wasn't too jumpy. Obviously, it probably was at times because we're out over the water, but it's a work in progress. Hopefully, guys gives you an insight into what we do here at News, what we do as pilots as well at the same time. How we do it, what we do, and what the city looks like from the air. Please come and visit us sometime if you want to come and fly, and please obviously subscribe to our channel and Thelion Helicopters to check out more helicopter related videos. Here we are, back down on the ground. Alright, hope everyone stays safe out there, have a good day, or a good evening now in Long Beach and the rest of the world. See you all again soon.